And we're back! Finally, we're back! It's been a month. Have you forgotten who I was? By the way, my name is Drew Edgar. I'm an author. Sometimes I do Twitch streaming about stuff. Generally, I mess about though online and just generally have a good time. But anyway, that's what I do. Anyway, welcome one and welcome all. There may be all sorts of technical problems this evening because I can't remember if this works. It's just such like way too long ago. So for huge apologies, by the way, for abandoning you to the mercies of Edgar Rice Burrough and then just basically running off into the sunset going bye. So yes, for reasons of real life and many other confusing things that are way too expensive, way too extensive to go into now, the writing stream has had something of a hiatus, but it's back. We're back. We're back tonight, and we'll be discussing stuff. Nothing new there. I notice I've already got something has been switched off in the top of the screen. I have no idea what that is. I'll try and fix that later on. We'll see how it goes because everything's busted. But yeah, we'll get there. We always do, don't we? We always muddle through somehow. But anyway, so let's do the thing because the thing is the thing, and the thing must be done regardless. I have no idea why, but it's important. Otherwise, we'll upset the stream gods or something, won't we? If there are such things. So let's start how we mean to go on, and welcome everybody to the stream, one and all. Have a Boo Boo is here with 4 thumbs up for us in the chat. Winter Mute GB is here. Of course he is, because he always is. The Harkonnens are here, ready to invade Arrakis as ever. The Arrakis are here, ready to fight off the invasion of the Harkonnens. Commander Hope Hubris is here as well. Commander JR1988 is here. Dragon Eye is here. Frank Miner 2949er is here as well. Moving on down. Commander Sea Dweller is here, dwelling as everybody does. Glenn is here. Hello, Glenn. Good to see you as well. Lucky Luigi is here. Professor Siege is here as hell. That's a good name. I like that. Professor Siege. Commander Judge Blue is here as well. Big 39GT is here. Alan RP42 is here. Good to see you, Alan. Crazy Otto is here. As well, everyone is here, and now going around through the chat, I was having a look at this all the way through. So, condolences to Commander Hope Hubris and Dragoneye for the sad news that you've already mentioned in the chat. I lost my own father many moons ago now, actually. So yes, my sympathies to you, my friends, and while we can't provide any direct immediate support, obviously through the complexities of the internets and goodness knows locations, all those kind of things. Our thoughts are with you, and if we can do anything to lift your spirits this evening, then we shall. So enjoy yourselves tonight, my friend. You are very welcome, and it's good to have you here amongst hopefully A, sympathetic people, and B, slightly unhinged, quite mad, nutty people who will hopefully lift your spirits a little bit. That's if we can achieve that, I think we can count that as an achievement. That'll do. Okay. Welcome. Lovely to have you aboard. Anyway, right. So it all gave us the technical gremlins are on the rampage. They always are, and they always will be. It did give us all time to read the book. Now I have to say, a month now. Yeah. How many of you? A couple of people in the chat I've already mentioned have an excuse for not having completed the book, but the rest of you. If your homework is not on my desk by the end of the stream, I shall be sorely disappointed. There may be lines. There may be detention after class. Okay. There may. Although some of you would probably enjoy this, there might even be a cane. No, we're not going to get there. There's no excuse for the rest of you not having finished the book, is there? Really? I mean, let's be honest. Okay. Huge revisited is here as well. Your stream always lifts my spirits, Dragon. Excellent. You always lift my spirits, and the rat back in the chat. Good to hear. Well done, everybody, for cheering these guys up. I am not slightly unhinged with Mute GB. Commander Sea Dweller has read the trilogy, watched the movie, I must admit, I watched the movie too, actually. I was out of curiosity because I was like, there's a movie? What entirely passed me by. What? They turned it into a movie? Really? So, so the movie was, well, oddly enough, actually, well, well, let's talk about the book first, then we can go on to the movie, because there's stuff to be said about the movie. But anyway, so I didn't read it either, Glenn. So Glenn's gonna have to bug out. Come on, Glenn, you've had a month, man. What's the matter? What have you been doing? I know I'm a mum. I mean, this is an American author writing an American book. It starts in America. I mean, come on, what else can I do for you? Ah, dear. Book is Princess of Mars. Movie John Carter. Yeah, so back in the class for Glenn. Yep. It's those Americanisms. Weren't there two? I don't know. Were there two films? John Carter is the only one I came across. Is there another one? Because that was, well, I don't know how recent it was, but it looked relatively recent because it had CGI that sort of worked. unlike earlier CGI, which kind of sort of doesn't. So I think it was just called John. So yeah, we'll talk about the film later. 2012, so it's not that long ago, is it? It's not long ago. But anyway, so anyway, back to the book, which you've had a month. That's long enough. Now let me press the right button because quite close. Oh, that's Bing wallpaper giving me an error message. I can't do anything about that. I'll remind me later. Just make it go away. Something's not quite right. Why is that bottom on my screen? Try that. Is that working? Right. Okay. So if I put that sort of there and scroll that a bit, does that? Oh, yeah, look at that. There we go. I read all 11 books a while back. Love the series. So there aren't bad. So bad there aren't no more. So yeah. So it's actually. I mean, I was reading a little bit of background on Edgar Rice Burroughs, and he wrote a lot of stuff, didn't he? In Babylon 5, John Carter was the first human to land on Mars. So that was that a little nod to Mr. Edgar Rice Burroughs. Anyway, so he lived, Edgar Rice Burroughs, 1875 to 1950. No, not 8. Yeah, 18. My voice would be 100. Yeah, 1875 to 1950. So he died 20 years before I was born. And yeah, you're quite right, Professor Siege. He invented the character Tarzan. I hadn't realised that. Now Tarzan, I must admit, I don't think I've read the Tarzan books, but I've certainly watched some of the old black and white films. I hadn't realised that was him. So this is possibly one of the more modern books that we've been able to get through Gutenberg, and it's relative. I don't know when was this one written. This is obviously the first of his Mars books. So let's just do the old Wikipedia for a moment. Although Mad Monksoft is usually about. I don't know if he's about this evening. If he was, he'd already be ahead of us. But Princess of Mars, when was it written? So actually, there's the DVD of that we were talking about, 2009. So it has been made into a DVD film. Where's the novel? Okay, so 1907. No. This is about the 1912 novel. Okay, so 1912. So that makes him not that old, actually, doesn't it? Relatively. So if he was born 1875, he'd have been 25 at the turn of the century, plus another 12 years. So he was only 37 when he wrote this, which isn't that old. Well, I mean, depends where you measure it from, I suppose, and how old you are. But 37 is, I mean, it's a respectable age, but it's not. He was fairly young as well, I think, for writing this kind of story. So anyway, we'll come back to that in a bit. You didn't know he created Tarzan? No, I didn't realise it was Edgar Rice Burroughs. No, I didn't. The audible version of the trilogy has great extras about Burroughs' life and the background. My jurisprudence lecturer. You had a jurisprudence lecturer? He was obsessed with the Barsoom series, so much so he set his essays on making a constitution for Barsoom. Ooh, wow. Alan read some books by him set on Mars years ago that featured skating on canals, right? Commander Hope Rivers, I think that was the original title of the Tarzan genre. I lost interest after they lost Johnny Wasmiller and especially... Oh, Cheetah, yes! Cheetah, of course. And the Marvel comic series as well. I was curious about the movie, watched the movie and then got curious about the series and picked up the books and loved them, went back to watch the movie and was disappointed in the movie. That sometimes happens, yeah. My favourite fantasy author was Robert E. Howard. Conan, yeah, topped himself at age 30. Wow, yeah. I mean, yeah. Writers can be unstable types, so be careful. Jurisprudence, legal philosophy, part of my bachelor's degree course in law. Wow, okay. GR 1988. Any questions on law? We're now pointing in your direction. Excellent. Now, the other thing that interested me about Princess of Mars, actually, in terms of who had read it and whether or not it was, whether that was a thing that was important about the book, was you've forgotten it all. As most of us who have a degree probably have. My degree, unfortunately, in a total aside, was in computer science, which of course isn't really a science at all, of course. But everything I learned is entirely useless and totally and utterly irrelevant and archived now, to the point at which my son now tours around when he gets time off from university. He tours around computer museums, sends me pictures of things in glass boxes in museums and says, "Dad, is this one of yours?" And unfortunately, about 80% of the time, there's a little anecdote from me going, yes, I remember them. I used to code this, that, and the other on them. Yes. Thanks, son. he came up with this. He had to write this classic emulator for, what was it? An ARM processor, ARM 5 emulator chip or something, again, part of his coursework. And he said, yes, apparently this was based on some ARM computer back in the 80s. You might have heard of it. It was called the Acorn Archimedes. I said, yes, use one of those when they were new. To which, of course, he just goes, lol. SCSI drives, token ring networks, yes. Remember them all very fondly. They're all in museums now, okay? And the waffle tangent starts, yay! Alan says he graduated in chemical engineering in 1977. It's a subject that's slow moving, that a lot of what I learned is still... We see, that to me feels quite nice. Nothing that I've ever learned, and the amount that I have learned over my life is very small. But nothing I've learned lasts for more than, I don't know, a decade at most. It belongs in a museum. Yes, it does. Everything I've ever worked on is now in a museum, which is quite sad, but there we go. Anyway, so I digress. You may be surprised to find out. The reason why Princess of Mars was interesting to me historically is because Carl Sagan, who is, or was, as some of you know, a kind of personal hero of mine, one of my top 3 gents that I've been inspired by in my life, and he mentioned that he, as a child, was inspired by this book as part of his. He became a very famous professor and communicator of science, astronomy, etc., etc. But he read this as a child and was moved and excited and got fired up for space exploration by this story. So I was quite keen to read it. Like your cars. No, you see now my cars. I feel very elevated about my cars, because I don't know if any of you have watched, so no spoilers if you haven't, but I've just finished the latest season of Picard. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I won't spoil it because it's very, very good. Go watch it, okay? It's really, really good. I shall be writing up something about it on Twitter, doubtless, tomorrow. There's reasons why you don't want all that. You want analog stuff, okay? You want old school tech. It's really, really cool to have old school tech. Yeah. So go back and get your old school tech. I'm delighted that I've got an old car because, come the apocalypse, I'm going to be sorted. So there we go. Commander Hope Hubris has a certificate in archaeology. Shouldn't you have a stone tablet in archaeology? Most of that is still relevant. Well, archaeology, I suppose, does it change? I mean, you discover new things, obviously, but not all. Okay, so many fast evolving techniques interpreted. I suppose in the old days it was what, chisels and little brushes. Maybe. Do they still do that? I don't know. I know nothing about archaeology at all. It's on the watch list, so no. Okay, so I won't spoil it. So it's worth watching. Okay, series 3, yes, very, very good. Yeah. No idea why they didn't just do season 3 first and leave it at that. Dragon Eye's got an old Hilux. Excellent. I'm going to nip out and get some chips in before we get on with the book. I'm sure. Thanks for the vote of confidence there, Commander Senior. Well, we haven't caught up as a group, have we, for like a month? So I mean, that's 4 waffles worth. I mean, based on that principle, I shouldn't actually even start for another hour. But we will in the breakfast tradition. We will get back on topic eventually, okay? But there's much to there's much to catch up upon, you know. Ah, dear. They'll have time to cut and peel the tomatoes. Your faith in me is staggering. I vote of confidence in my abilities not to waffle. I haven't even mentioned Lloyd's yet. Yeah. There's at least 3 or 4 anecdotes from there to get stuffed in there, just to the annoyance of Wintermute GB and the rest of the clan. Potatoes. Ah, dear. Right. So there we go. Anyway. You're allowed, Drew. We have a month's waffles to catch up on. I know, but we need to go for the benefit of anybody who's actually watching this. Some sort of sensible discussion on the Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So there's probably one person out there who's patiently tapping their fingers on the keyboard, going, "Go on, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point." So for that person, whoever they are, and it's probably not any of you seasoned chatterers. It's probably some poor person thinking, "Really? Is he ever going to shut up and talk about the book?" I'm going to make an effort to shut up and talk about the book. Sensible discussion. I'm off then, says Commander Zeno. That person is Commander Zeno. I'm not convinced it is. Crazy Otto says they've long gone. Mad Elks BDX is the first time chat. Welcome to the writing stream. As you've probably found out, we are fairly informal on this writing stream, and we do take a little bit of time to get to the point. But we are the best of friends, and it's a sort of support group for writers who either have been writers who can't be bothered to be writers who have problems doing writing, or just anybody else who happens into wandering off the street and goes, "Okay, well, this is a cool place to hang out." So anyway, Mad Elks BDX, welcome to the Madhouse. And it's in danger of degenerating into a which is the best captain of the Enterprise. But there we go. It's sort of more of a book club. That's probably the best way. Just desperately trying to steer the conversation back. Pull up. Right, let's go back to Edgar Rice Burroughs, because he wrote a lot of books, did Edgar Rice Burroughs. I was quite surprised. So I mean, let's just get a little bit about him before. I mean, how many books did he write? So he died age 74, which isn't a bad age for the time. How many books did he write? Literary career. Tarzan, yeah. Reception. Okay, here we go. So there's his biography. So the Barsoom series, which is the one where Princess of Mars is the first one, is his first kind of stuff. But he was writing other stuff. Look at this. Now I can't do this, so I'm quite impressed with Mr. Burroughs here, because Princess of Mars was written in 1912, but also Tarzan of the Apes at the same time. He wrote a bunch of other things. Look, At the Earth's Core 2 years later, Pirates of Venus, The Land That Time Forgot. So some really big classic names, actually. So Tarzan, the Land That Time Forgot. Some big stuff, all right? And what this shows also, he was writing them all at the same sort of time. So Princess of Mars 12, look, following year, 1913, 1914, 1912, 1913. So in the course of 3 years there, he's written 6 books there. He's added another one there. That's pretty prolific output. Okay, I can't do that. And any of you who go, yeah, I'm pretty good at this whole writing log. I mean, this guy really bashed them out pretty damn fast. Okay, so and he concentrated on Tarzan because it really took off. It's a bit of a cultural phenomenon. So yeah, look, I mean, 26 books. So that's a lot of stuff, right? I mean, I know that these last ones actually weren't written by him, but well, they were kind of modified and then published later. But that is a lot of stuff, right? That is a lot of stuff. So hats off to Mr. Burrough for simply prolific amounts of books. I mean, I've written in how many books have I written in 10 years? No, a bit more than that now. My first book was kind of, if I write it properly, was 2006. So how long ago is that now? 2006 is 17 years. So in 17 years, I've written 12 books. So I'm very much less than one per year. So there's no way I'm going to catch him up. just can't do it. Although my books are longer, so maybe if I do word count, I've got a chance. But I bet Burrough would have written less if he repaired old cars. I do have that problem. I have too many other interests. That is a problem. But it's still pretty good. I mean, so he chucked a bunch of stuff out. So good for him in that regard. And pretty much, I think it's fair to say everybody has heard of Tarzan, right? And that's something that spans generations. I think even my kids would probably have heard of Tarzan. He had no distraction, computer games, Netflix, etc., streaming and things like that. Yeah, exactly right. There was a bit about Frank Miner. That's quite a good quote. There was a bit about him in DVD extras. He saw some pulp magazines and thought, I could write garbage like this. Hey, there we go. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Sean is here, Orkney Sean. Now, Sean, I'm assuming Orkney Sean is the same Sean who has very kindly given me a new hat pin. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that. I should go back to the full camera for a moment, so you can see it now. If I sneak up to the camera, can you see my new hat pin? Is it showing up? Oh, that's well, I've got the right angle there. There we go. For those of you with eagle eyes, it is it's a beautiful, but I believe I'm right in saying it's a Land Rover. No, it's not a Jeep. It's a Land Rover. It's which is a British version of a Jeep. It's a Land Rover Defender. There we are. Which is I think the kind of rough. Is it the rough and tumble version? Because there's Land Rover. It's a Series 2. There we go. Is it Series 2? I don't know. Don't know much about Land Rovers. Never call a Land Rover a damn Jeep. No. Best car ever. There we go. So it's a British institution. I think once upon a time they were very, very, very highly regarded. Now it's a very blurry car. Yeah. I don't know if it won't show up. But anyway, thank you very much, Sean, for a new hat pin. So there we go. I don't know, is it a Series 2 Land Rover? Anyway, so it's an ancient British 4x4. It's a farm machine. It's the sort of stuff that you if you want a 4x4 that works and is literally just a 4x4, which has no kind of extras on it, a Land Rover Defender is what you get in the UK anyway. If you want to be patriotic and buy British. I make no comment about its reliability. Otherwise, I don't want to offend my British companions. I suspect it would not perhaps necessarily do all that well compared to a modern Toyota Hilux, which has already been mentioned in the chat earlier. But never mind. Anyway, enough with the diversions. But thanks, Sean. I much appreciate the hat pin. It's really, really cool. So it was the last reliable Land Rover. So that was a long time ago. Commander Cedar, peeling spuds ready for his fish and chips. So anyway, so Princess of Mars. Right, let's get back to this. Princess of Mars is the first book in the Barsoom series of planetary adventures. No, planetary romances, they're called. Okay, which is an odd phrase, planetary romance. But it's sort of a, in literary circles, which most of us don't frequent, and I certainly don't. But in literary circles, wherever they are, whether these literal circles exist, a planetary romance is a sub-genre of space opera. So when I say space operas tend to be, novels, movies, even computer games, really sort of set in space, right? But not really doing much in the way of actual sciencey stuff, right? Okay, so it's space is the setting, but the science can go hang, basically. That's a space opera. So a classic space opera is Star Wars, right? Star Wars is entirely a space opera. It doesn't actually make any scientific sense at all, but it's great fun. All right. And putting this in context, of course, this is written in 1912. It's long before we had any photographic reconnaissance of Mars, which didn't happen until late 1950s. There's a bit of context there. You're quite right, come on, Hope. It's worth us just expounding on the context. Because back in 1912, when it was written, the best pictures we had of Mars were through telescopes, right? And those telescopes weren't like the telescopes we have today, and the images that they had weren't like the images we have today, because of course today we can take really, really good images of Mars with things like orbital space telescopes and even ground-based telescopes with digital imaging and all that kind of good stuff. In fact, amateur telescopes today, the sort of little I don't know, £300-400 telescope you can buy in your backyard and slap a digital camera on, can take a much, much better picture of Mars than the best telescopes of 1912 could. That were in the hand of professional astronomers, because they just did not have the equipment. What they had was, optical telescopes with photographic film, photographic plates. That was peak technology for that era. So the best pictures they had of Mars were pretty darn blurry. And the only way they could really record any features on Mars was by eye. They basically eyed a telescope and draw it on a piece of paper, and that's how they basically analyze the surface of Mars. Unfortunately, people like Percival Lowell, who has a lovely observatory, actually. I went to visit it out in Arizona, he thought he was seeing all sorts of interesting detail upon the surface of Mars. It turned out that he wasn't, and he drew, maps with canals and connections and city-states and all sorts of interesting things upon the surface of Mars, which I assume genuinely believed that he was seeing through his telescope, and unfortunately it was totally made up. None of that stuff was there. But because he was an eminent astronomer of the time, his observations were considered to be the best available. So everybody kind of went, well, that's what's there, right? And so the science fiction of the era was based upon whatever science was available. Unfortunately, the science wasn't very good. But the idea that there were a rather romantic idea of Mars as a sort of desert world that was fighting off the gradual loss of water from the surface, because they could see that there were ice caps still. So it's not unreasonable within the lack of available information to say, well, there's ice caps on Mars, and the rest of the surface appears to be rather desertificated. Clearly, water is a scarce resource upon Mars, and maybe if there are intelligent aliens there, maybe they're running out of water and they're funneling it down from the ice caps to the rest of the thing. And there were dark patches that came and went upon the surface of Mars along with the seasons, so it sort of made sense. Maybe that's vegetation growing and dying off, all those sort of things. It made sense, it was logical. Unfortunately, it was also totally and utterly wrong. So the literature of the time reflects this sort of sense that Mars was an ancient, older planet that was running out of natural resources, and it had become a desert, and the inhabitants there were struggling to survive upon the surface of Mars. And you know, if you got that as a kind of scientific basis, then the literature of the time reflects that, and that's exactly what we find in this novel. So yeah, so that's it was a smudge on his eyepiece. And even Nikola Tesla thought he would manage to pick up artificial signals from Mars. So I mean, and there was, I think, in one of the UK newspapers, I think it was the Telegraph. I might be wrong about this, but it was certainly one of the newspapers. Basically said, you know, there's a competition for anyone to detect alien life beyond Earth, but Mars was specifically excluded from the competition by the editors because it was deemed to be too easy. Which I just think is a lovely piece of history. Yet, to my best of my knowledge, H.G. Wells left Mars well alone while predicting the event of the airplane nuclear warfare. Why do you suppose that? Well, that's a good question. Oh no. I mean, well, H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds. So exactly. So you know, bam, 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 etc. Yeah, so you know, so he didn't set a story on Mars, but the Martians were definitely a thing, and the Martians invaded Earth in War of the Worlds because their world was running out of resources. So you can sort of see the, you know, the influence, the background, the scientific thinking of the time did influence these writers in what they wrote, which I think is, you know, is quite interesting, because you can sort of see. Nowadays, I mean, we make fun of it a little bit on this stream because of, you know, well, that's what we do. that's our raison d'etre. You know, the use of certain types of technology in science fiction today. You know, for example, if you want your science fiction to kind of be a little bit current, you have to use the word quantum all the time. Okay, there's always a quantum flux, or a quantum discontinuity, or something like that, right? Yeah, when Star Trek was at its sort of heyday in the 90s, it was all wormholes and particle of the week and gravimetric surges and things like that. You know, so all those sort of things. Okay, so it reflects the concerns of time. Now, there's doubtless, I think, in the next year or two, going to be a massive influx of AI stories, right? AI has gone bad. You know, it's not going to be the robots Terminator 2 style that's going to take over the planet. It's going to be AIs in the computers. I think we're going to see a massive influx of those in the next few years. In the 80s, it was all about tachyons. Yeah, that's right, tachyons and hyperspace and things. I was commenting to my son, actually, the other thing that you notice in the technology of the time, the word turbo was everywhere. I mean, even your PC had a turbo button, right? Because the 80s. Turbo tachyons. The quantum AI influx is coming. It definitely is. So JR988 has already published his AI story, so it's ahead of the curve. Yeah, turbo lasers in Star Wars. What does that even mean, right? Turbo lasers in Star Wars. I remember thinking that. I mean, it's like lasers. Lasers are cool. Lasers are dangerous. What can we do to lasers to make them even more cool and more dangerous? I know. Stick the word turbo in front of them. Now we have turbo lasers. It's like two pieces of technology which have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Let's stick them together because it sounds cool. Turbo lasers. It's just so stupid. Mad Elk's been yeah. So Porsche, you're quite right. Porsche does have an electric car that's a turbo. It's not a turbo, is it? Like, it's a brand now, isn't it? Oh, well, yeah, turbo means fast. It's not a turbo. A turbo is a particular. No. Anyway, it doesn't matter, does it? Because you can't tell these people that they're wrong. They don't, for some reason, they don't accept it. Turbo fusion. Fusion is turbo powered. Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, turbo boosted Battlestar Galactica. Yes, the Vipers on their joystick, didn't they? They had lasers, turbo, and there was another button. What was the third button? Totally off topic. There were three. What was it? What? It's not a fish. That's totally different. What was the third button? Somebody must know. There was turbo, there was fire, then there was something else. Was it a sort of reverse thrust? I don't know. Anyway, somebody go off and find out. The rest of us are talking about Princess Amal, or trying to talk about Princess Amal. Turbo Nitro. Anyway, so Princess of Mars. Now, what's interesting about the title here, Princess of Mars? Now, it's obviously is ultimately about. Well, it's kind of ultimately about a Princess of Mars, but it's not. The story isn't really about a Princess of Mars. The story is about John Carter, who is the. Did we answer that in the previous stream? I've forgotten. What was the answer with GB? That's the important one. I don't care whether we answered it before. What is the answer? 40 minutes in and we're on the title. I know. Yeah, but we haven't been around for a month. Come on, give me a right, so let's talk about. Well, we have kind of talked about Edgar Rice Burroughs a little bit and things. So yeah, anyway, at least twice. Well, what's the answer? Because you didn't expect me to remember things like that. So anyway, a Princess of Mars. So now this is so we talked about this being a planetary romance, which is a subgenre of a space opera. So a space opera is sort of set in space, but it may have spaceships and things like turbo lasers, which don't really make sense but sound cool. Okay, so there's not too much science in the science fiction here, so it's why it's not really science fiction. Space opera is a bit kind of it's less sciencey than science fiction, although it's set in space. So Star Wars is a good space opera. Now, a planetary romance is sort of a subset of space opera in the sense that it's generally more confined to a particular locale between a small number of planets, and turbo space opera. That's exactly what it is. It's got a romance in it. Okay, so it's not just an adventure. It's got to have a sort of boy meets girl under silvery moon kind of a thing going on. It tends to be what a planetary romance is. Commander Sea Dweller's gone straight for Hitchhikers. Boy meets girl under silvery moon, which then explodes for no readily apparent reason. So there we go. Now, interesting, again, set in its time, 1875, so this is a 1912 book. Notice that they've still got this quite old-fashioned spoilers in the chapter titles, which dates the book to a certain period, early 19th century. So there we go. So there we go. Glenn says there was an IM button on the right side of the joystick, but we have no idea what IM was. Is that from Battlestar Galactica? Okay. Somebody's quest is to find out what IM stood for on the Battlestar Galactica original joystick from the 1980s series. Okay, that is your quest. Fire, turbo, and IM. Okay. Sorry, not 19th century, 20th century. I'll get that right. So yes, they did start these as serialized fiction. So you would send out a chapter at a time. Yeah. So the problem with these is they sort of almost give away the story. You've got to be a bit careful. But I suppose if you only got one chapter at a time, it wouldn't really matter. But I don't know what they were kind of trying to achieve with this title of the chapter. It's not something we tend to do nowadays. We just say it's chapter 2. But it was definitely a thing then. And that dates the book into, like you say, the early 20th century. Instant messaging. A bit before the time, I think, with GB. Into morals, says Glenn, dropping into Latin unexpectedly. So this sort of tells you what's going to happen. But anyway, the book starts again with one of these slightly weird forewords. It's like, I need to explain about stuff before the book starts. I suppose we would call this maybe a prologue nowadays rather than a foreword. But it's written by obviously it's written by the author of the book, but it's actually written to the reader in context by the author of the book, which I think is quite an unusual thing. So At the bottom of here is basically yours very sincerely, Edgar Rice Burrough. So the person who's writing the foreword is the author of the book, but he's also put himself in the book in contemporary part of the actual fictional story as himself. So I wonder if that is because this is an early book of his. Obviously, this is before Edgar Rice Burroughs was notable at all. So maybe he just wanted to, maybe this is a touch of hubris here on behalf of Mr. Burroughs. I want to put myself in my own story, promote himself. Exactly. So it's weird. Anyway, so he basically says that, and Edgar Rice Burroughs is actually a minor character in the story, which I must admit I didn't remember from reading it before. I was a little bit surprised when he said, "Hang on a minute." So Edgar Rice Burroughs, hang on a minute, is that? No, he's actually talking about the character. So, he's related. Edgar Rice Burroughs is related to John Carter in the story. And he's basically been given Captain John Carter's estate upon his death, and being given some very peculiar instructions about John Carter. So it's an interesting little setup. So basically, Edgar Rice Burroughs gets the entire income for 25 years. And then after 25 years of looking after John Carter's estate, the entire thing becomes his to do with whatever he was. And then he leaves this nice little. I mean, this is quite good. A strange feature about the tomb where John Carter's body still lies is that the massive door is equipped with a single gold-plated spring lock, which can only be opened from the inside. Bum, bum, bum. So the IM button is the reverse thruster, but is it called IM? Idiot mode. But is that not true of all of us? Well, it is. It is. I must admit, I fell prey to this myself. So those of you who've read Elite Reclamation will note. I didn't put my name in the book, but I'll note there is a small scene with Salome in a lift. I think it is when she's aboard the space station and she sees this chap with his family sitting opposite her in the lift. The guy in the opposite chair bears a certain resemblance to an author not too far away from you. I've been guilty, and I think many authors possibly are guilty of putting themselves into their fictional worlds like that. So Commander J. I put Drew in one of my books as well. Dear. Is that not true of all of it? So I mean, we all put a bit of ourselves into books, but do we actually put ourselves as a character into the book? I mean, I suppose I kind of did, but I didn't do anything important. I was just there and I was gone, in the next scene. So it's not like I didn't say anything. I didn't inherit the main character's money or anything like that. I don't know. Kind of just a cameo in text, I suppose, is probably the best way to do that. But anyway, so maybe Edgar was. I mean, he was a youngish man, 37 here at this point in time. Stephen King is known for putting himself in his books. I mean, so maybe it's an author thing. Nothing really wrong with it. It's just a little bit of vanity, isn't it? I suppose. So it starts off on the Arizona hills. Now, the first thing I noticed here, and I don't know if the rest of you thought this, given this is quite an old book still, it's not that much later than, The Time Machine and, War of the Worlds, which obviously are from the previous century, but it's only a decade or two later, right? Writing styles have changed. I was reading this thinking, okay, well, this feels a lot more modern than anything else that we've read recently. And I know we've been concentrating on old stuff, 19th century stuff up until this point. This is a 20th century novel, but it's much more modern in the style of reading. If you compare it to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or the War of the Worlds, it's much, dare I say it, much more readable to a modern audience. It felt a lot more modern to me. So, but this is a youngish man, I suppose, writing in 1912. Maybe he just had a better editor. It does. It did. I went to MuteGB. I'm with you. It feels more modern. It's also American, I suppose. I mean, HG. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So maybe it's. It feels like it cuts to the chase quicker than most of the novels that we have. It doesn't do nearly as much description. It cuts to the action faster, which is good with the Americanisms. Yeah, and it starts in America, and it starts in Arizona. Now it's interesting. I'm guessing, and given that, as I've already mentioned, Percival Lowell, the astronomer, was also in Arizona. So I feel that the whole Arizona thing is quite is quite interesting. The fact that it was set in Arizona to start with, anyway, so it starts off in Arizona, and it's a bit of an odd start. It starts off with he can't remember his childhood. He's always been a man of about 30. And I appear today as I did 40 years or more ago, and it doesn't really explain this. It just kind of drops this in. It's like, well, I'm a man. I've never aged. I didn't have a childhood. I can't remember a childhood. I've died twice and I'm still alive. It's like, okay, oh, that's a bit weird. But he does think he's mortal as well. So he's writing down the interesting stories of his life. Somehow he starts off as an ordinary soldier of fortune. Now, I don't know, this bit I was a little bit lost, and I was going to read a bit more about it before this evening's stream, but possibly the Americans on the stream can tell us a little bit more about this. So that first paragraph is quite a good hook. It's quite intriguing. Well, who is this guy? Why has he not got a childhood? Why has he not got, is he immortal? But he's scared of being killed. So I don't know. I don't know if we get more background on that as part of the story. Anyway, this manuscript is basically hidden until such time as he's already dead. He talks about Mars. So basically Mars is in there. Everything's in there to start with. So your interest is kind of, okay, well, Mars, really? What's going on here? He starts off as Captain Jack Carter of Virginia. At the close of the Civil War, I found myself possessed of several $100,000, which sounds like an awful lot of money for back then. He was, Confederate. Now, I don't know my American history very well. Apologies for this. Now, Confederate is the Southern states? Is that right? And I think that's the losing side in the in the American Civil War. Is the Southern states, right? And when was the American total losers? Confederate money was worthless as the American Civil War concluded. Confederate is the Southern states, and the money was worthless after the war. Right. Okay. So he found himself possessed of several $100,000 Confederate dollars, which is presumably therefore not worth anything at all. And the captain's commissioned the cavalry army, an army which no longer exists. So the army is decommissioned as well. The servant of a state which vanished with the hopes of the South. Okay, that makes sense. So masterless. So that's what he's saying. He hasn't got any money at all. Right. Okay. So it's set in 1863. So this is interesting, actually. So he's writing in 1912 and setting his story 150 years earlier, 60 years earlier, which is interesting, actually. So it's a story set in the past from his perspective, but not that far in the past. It'll be like one of us writing a story in the 1960s-ish. Yeah. So he falls in there but they haven't got any money. He can't fight anymore because the war's over. And he works his way into the southwest and basically retrieve his fallen fortune in a search for gold. Okay. That goes back to Burroughs' brief military youth. Right, okay, cool. Which would have been in 1875 onwards. So not long after the conclusion of the Civil War. Right, that kind of makes sense. So he would have been surrounded as a youngster with memories of the war, but not actual memories of the war, if that makes sense. Anyway, so they find some gold, and And I did like this. This felt to me like somebody writing who had been in Arizona. The morning of Powell's departure was like nearly all Arizona mornings, clear and beautiful. And I could see him and his pack animals picking their way down the mountain. Now, I've actually spent a little bit of time in Arizona. I went there, oddly enough, to go and see the meteorite crater in somewhere nearby. East of Arizona. I think it might still be in Arizona, actually. And it kind of, I remember reading this thinking, that feels right, because I've woken up in the early morning in Arizona, and it's gorgeous. I was in a place called Sonona. Anyway, it was very pretty. I remember it being very, very pretty, and it was fresh and clear and mountainous and beautiful and stark and very, very nice. So it felt to me like somebody who had been to Arizona or lived in Arizona, and Barringer crater, meteor crater, is in Arizona. It is in Arizona, yeah. Okay, so Winslow, that's right. That's where the song is, isn't it? Standing on the corner of Winslow, Arizona. I did go to Winslow, Arizona, and stood on the corner as well, and. It's a really boring place, Winslow, Arizona. The only claim to fame Winslow, Arizona has, it's been mentioned in a song, and boy, do the locals milk it. They've got in Winslow, Arizona. There was absolutely nothing else in Winslow, Arizona that was of note, as far as I could tell, other than there's a wall there with a picture of a car painted on it, which is based on the song. There's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford, and there's a mural of a flatbed Ford, and across the street there's the souvenir shop. And I kid you not, the souvenir shop has a what seems to be a relatively expensive PA system. All it does is play the Eagles' "Take It Easy" song over and over again on constant repeat for the entire day, as far as I can tell. So. So if you ever go to Winslow, Arizona, and you have to if you're there, because I mean that's where the song comes from, be prepared for the gift shop. It has the Eagles' "Take It Easy" on constant repeat forever, and that's all that was there as far as I can remember. But yeah, good fun. Anyway, so anyway, so then basically. He notes that his mate has been pursued by somebody else, and it turns out it's some Indians. This was quite interesting to read, of course, because it sort of smacks of period attitudes to the Indians. And I don't know a great deal about. I don't know a great deal about how the attitudes to the Indians have changed over the years in America, but only when you read literature of the time, the Indians are almost always presented as the bad guys, who just basically, they're vicious marauders, and they take their toll in lives and torture while the white party fell into their merciless clutches. It's like, okay. possibly a little bit of extra context needed here. Anyway. So he's got some respect for the Indians. The Sioux and North, and I knew his chances were small against a party of cunning trading Apaches. So in these days, it's not right to call them Indians; it's Native Americans. Okay, so you're being politically correct. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting as well. So so things have changed in the last 100 years, which is not really surprising. Native Americans. Okay, where did the phrase Indian come from? Because I mean. They're not Indians. There's no way they're Indians, because the Indians come from India. I don't really. I mean, I remember them being Indians when I was at school. We were taught about Indians, cowboys and Indians. We played games like that at school. You could be the cowboys or the Indians. The cowboys had the guns and the Indians had the bows and arrows. That's what we played. Oh, it's because Columbus thought he had made it to India. Right. Okay. Christopher Columbus was an idiot. Right. That's why. Okay. Early explorers thought Early explorers thought they'd find a long way around. Yes, I suppose that for the spice route or something, wasn't it? Okay, Native American don't look anything like Indians. I'm always mystified by that. Okay, so well, that's why we've explained it. Okay, so it's Christopher Columbus's fault. What a knob. Best way to be an explorer, not knowing where you are. So anyway, he takes off after Powell, and he eventually finds Powell captured by the Native American, and a little bit of interesting character development here. I thought this paragraph was particularly good. I do not believe that I made of the stuff of which constitute heroes, because in all of the hundreds of instances of my voluntary action placed me face to face with death, I can't recall a single one where any alternative step that I took occurred to me until many hours later. So I'm not brave, I'm just damned good. Which I thought was quite a nice way of basically saying, I'm not brave, this is just what I do. Anyways, he says, cowardice is just not optional with me. I'm just brave, period. You can use the term Indians. I don't want to offend anybody. Okay, so I can use the term Indians as it's the way it's used in the book. Fair enough. Anyway, so he eventually finds Powell, but his body has been, he's been shot with lots of hostile arrows of the Indians. Anyway, so he basically rescues his body, and the Indians, figure out that, actually he sort of charges down at them yelling, and then the Indians run away, and then they come back. Anyway, so he basically escapes, and they chase after him, and he finds a cave, and this is something that takes a long time to kind of. So why do you bother with all this sort of setup? It's of course anyway. So we're in the middle of Arizona desert. We're fighting the Indians, and suddenly we're in a cave. Okay, and then he gets a bit drowsy as he's in this cave, and he feels a bit drunk and a bit weird, and he passes out. And then when he sort of wakes up, he notices some weird. This is where it gets a bit weird. Some weird stuff's going on. Okay, so there's a faint, strange smell. There's a presence of something, and then the Indians basically are looking at whatever he's looking at, and they basically are terrified by whatever this is and run away. And then he finds he can't move, and then there's a sort of presence near him, but he can't turn around and look at it. And eventually, when moonlight floods the cave later on, he stands up and finds himself looking down at his body in a sort of out of the world, out of body experience, and he wonders if he's died, and whether or not he's passed over into the kind of the afterlife, which I think is probably the sort of question that most of us would experience. But he doesn't, he's for some reason then he's not wearing any clothes. He leaves his clothes behind, which is a bit weird. Anyway, so he runs out of the cave in his newfound weird, slightly mysterious body, and then it's very, very strange, this bit. It's all Arizona, it's all nice. He stands there looking at the stars, and his attention is riveted by a large red star close to the distant horizon. And as I gazed upon it, I felt a spell of overpowering fascination. It was Mars. Okay, so he comes out, there's Mars on the horizon. He looks at Mars. It's God of War. He's a fighting man. Connection. Well, kind of all makes sense. And then it sort of lures me towards it, so he says. And then in a single paragraph, boom, we're there. A longing beyond the power of proposition, I closed my eyes, stretched out my arms towards the god of my vocation, felt myself drawn with the suddenness of thought through the trackless immensity of space. There was an instant of extreme cold and utter darkness, and boom, he's on Mars. It's like, okay, so what? Sort of. It just seems like a really odd way to get to Mars. A sort of. I don't know. Is he really there? Is he dreaming? Has he been teleported? What's happened to him? He's just, there's Mars. Vroom, I'm there. And so this is what makes it space opera planetary romance. There's no science here. It's like, oh look, there's Mars. Oh, I'm there. He hasn't encountered a teleport or a weird piece of technology. He's just sort of gone, right? It's a very fantasy mode. It is. It's more magic than it is science fiction at this point. There's a spoil. Yeah, I know. We might get to that in the future. But yeah, and the film sorts it out slightly differently. But anyway, so there we go. Martian, the Martian tech magic and stuff. So yeah, so there is some stuff there. Anyway, so he arrives on Mars, right? Now, okay, so written in 1912. Of course, what should have happened the moment he arrived on Mars is he'd be unconscious in about 15 seconds and then dead 2 minutes later. But this being 1912, we had no idea what the surface of Mars was like. So as far as John Carter is concerned, the surface of Mars is rather like the Arizona desert, as opposed to what we now know it to be really like. Because of course there was no real knowledge of what the surface of Mars was like when this book was written. So we can round that out. No spoilers. Got to go grab. Yeah, because Glenn has promised to read the book. And so Glenn will report back in due course as to what the explanation is for the transfer mechanism. Anyway, so the midday sun was shining full upon me, and the heat of it was rather intense upon my naked body, yet no greater than would have been true under similar conditions in Arizona's desert. Now that again implies to me that Edgar Rice Burroughs was not a huge fan of scientific accuracy, because even a little bit of scientific nous would have told him that the sun, regardless of where it was, would be fainter on Mars than it is on Earth. In fact, the strength of the sun on Mars is significantly lower than it is on Earth because of the inverse square law of distance, right? I don't know what the difference is. I think it's quite dramatic, percentage-wise, that the amount of radiation that Mars receives compared to the Earth is considerably lower because of the inverse square law. But anyway, I'm sure Carl Sagan would have been pointing that out to him if he'd had the opportunity. But anyway, it's a rocky surface with yellowish moss-like vegetation. And he's in a deep circular basis, the outer verge of which I can distinguish with legendary low hills. Okay, so far so good, right? Not too bad. Maybe the thing there. Anyway, so springing to my feet, I received my first Martian surprise, for the effort which on Earth would have brought me standing upright carried me into the Martian air at the height of about 3 yards. Okay, it's like 3 yards. The Martian gravity, right, is about 1/3 of the Earth. So the best. I mean, what's unassisted jumping straight. An effort of just standing upright. 3 yards into the air. No. Okay. And the movie, I did watch the movie. The movie of this scene is just, you just watch it, it's just hysterical, right? Because basically it's just wrong. There's no other word for it. It's just really, really stupid. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it's fair, Commander J. The thing about these kinds of stories, they don't mind what it's like in reality. Okay, it's not. But there's no scientific accuracy here whatsoever. Okay, but he has to introduce this because so Martian gravity is definitely weaker than the Earth, but you can't do what he did. Okay, on Mars, it's just not. Yeah, let it go, Drew. But I've got to mention it because I am the random rationalizer. So this is all wrong, okay? You can't do supernatural leaps on Mars, even if you're just an ordinary human, assuming you could breathe on the surface of Mars, which you can't. But this kind of basically is his USP on Mars. One of the things that differentiates John Carter on Mars is that because of his earthly upbringing, you can't... he can jump immense distances, right? Crazy, stupid distances. And if you watch the film, they extrapolate this to the point of absolute absurdity, where he can jump like thousands of feet in the air in a sort of Avengers style Superman kind of way, so it all gets very silly rather quickly. But so anyway, so it takes what basically here it kind of introduces him to he's a bit. He's basically got super strength on Mars because he's an Earthman, and it takes him a while to kind of get used to the fact that he's got this ability, and then eventually he comes across some aliens, right? But they didn't know the gravity of Mars. Well, I'm pretty sure in 1912 they had a reasonable idea of the gravity on Mars. So I don't know if they would have had it accurate down to 1/3, but I think they had a pretty firm idea because they'd have known the distance Mars was. They'd worked that sort of stuff out. They'd have known the mass of Mars, I think, so they could have made a pretty darn good stab at how much the gravity on Mars would have been. So they would have some. So I think Edgar, I suppose, either didn't know, didn't read, or just basically went, nah, just going to invent it because this sounds like a cool thing to write into my story. So I think that's basically what he had. They would know the gravity of Mars from the orbit of the moons. Yeah, so they weren't. The scientists of the time weren't daft. They knew what they were doing. Anyway, he stumbles across a kind of clutch of eggs, and some of these eggs are hatching, and this turns out to be the first alien race that he covers. So Burrough knew he was appealing to the pulp genre, so he knew his audience. So let's just chuck some. I mean, it's basically Avengers Assemble sort of stuff. Okay, it is more that sort of thing than it is anything kind of sensible. Anyway, so he invents an alien. These are the green men of Mars. Okay, so which sounds a little bit tongue-in-cheek, doesn't it? Little green men, but the green men of Mars. Basically, they are creatures which have long necks, 6 legs, or effectively 2 legs and 2 arms, with an intermediary pair of limbs, which could be used at will as either arms or legs, which sounds actually quite practical. The eyes were set at the extreme sides of their head, a trifle above the centre, and protruding in such a manner they can be directed either forward or back, and independently. So they're sort of like chameleon eyes, which it sounds like quite good. So suspend that disbelief. Anyway, so a little bit of description. So anyway, it's quite a wacky kind of alien race. These things. Now, these are very warlike creatures. Okay, they ride strange creatures. So it's pretty kind of spacey, weird kind of stuff. Okay, space alien type things. These green men involved, they're a warlike race. Okay, they spend their times doing war-y things. They're big as well. Okay, so the Martians. This didn't come across so much in the movie actually. Although they were bigger, they weren't as big as I think they needed to be. They're very big. I think they describe somewhere how tall they are. They're like 12, 14 feet tall, these Martians. But their bones are very large and they're muscled only in proportion to the gravitation which they must overcome. So basically, they're kind of weak relative to humans because we've evolved on a planet with high gravity. And so on and so forth. Yeah, so that's a good point actually, Hope Hooper. A notable lack of any sort of dialogue. He doesn't talk to anybody, does he? There are lots of description here. Some interesting bits and pieces here. Okay, so the metal of he talks about their weapons. So he's a military man, I suppose that makes sense. The metal of the barrel is an alloy composed principally of aluminium and steel, which they've learned to temper to a hardness far exceeding the steel with which we're familiar. Okay, so some of the stuff on Mars is more advanced. This was a bit weird. Okay, the weight of these rifles is comparatively little. Okay, so they've got a gun made of metal. It's a small caliber, explosive radium projectiles. I think radium's been chosen here because radium sounds cool. I think this is another example of quantum. If it was written today, it would be a quantum rifle. So instead of as a radium projectile. And the great length of the barrel, and they're deadly in the extreme at ranges which would be unthinkable on Earth. Okay, so the theoretic effective radius of this rifle is 300 miles. It's like, what? How can you have a rifle that's accurate to 300 miles? It's like you can't aim a rifle over the horizon and hit a target. It's just stupid. But the best they can do in actual service when equipped with their wireless finders and sighters is a trifle over 200 miles. Okay. What? He didn't say. Yeah, well. So anyway, I don't quite understand what all that was about. A rifle. If it said 300 meters, I was like, yeah, okay, that'll do. It's just like it fires a bullet. It's not a heat-seeking missile. So I don't know quite. Is this just Edgar Rice Burroughs basically saying "damned impressive weapon"? And everybody who reads this at the time will go, "Wow, what the Martians have got guns that are accurate to 300 miles." So that one really jolted me out of the story. It's like, what? What? Well, exactly. It's like over the horizon by 10 times. Anyway, so let's move on. Oh yeah, 300. Well, the visible curve of the Earth is only about 30 miles. So on Mars, it's going to be even less. So 300 miles is about 10 times past the horizon. So good luck shooting. I mean, good luck shooting it. I mean, what's the maximum range of a rifle? A good rifle. I don't know anything about rifles, so back to our American colleagues. Guns, right? What's the range of a good rifle today on Earth? I have no idea. I mean, it can't even be a mile, surely. Can you shoot? I was going to say a couple of 100 yards. You can't even see a mile away with a rifle. 300 miles, the only thing we have in that range is an ICBM. Yeah. All Brits think that every American knows everything about guns. I know that's the impression we get over here. I'm afraid, Glenn, the only stories we ever get about America are about guns and politicians and spaceships. That's all you Americans do: guns, politicians, spaceships. A 50 cal, about a mile. Okay, so maybe a mile is for a state-of-the-art rifle and somebody knows how to fire it, right? 300 miles. O.M. Burgers. Yes. Oh, and Elon Musk. Oh, that's when you've been covered by the spaceships. Even huge artillery in World War One was only good for 10 kilometers. Yeah, so it's like 300 miles. I don't know. That almost looks like a typo, but anyway, let's move on from the impossible Martian rifles. Anyway, so he does sort of try and communicate with him, but anyway, he's sort of captured by them. He's taken hostage, and as we get into chapter 4, he's a prisoner, which is exactly what chapter 4 tells us. Now, here's a bit of something that's a bit better. We were, as I was later learned, nearing the edge of one of Mars's long dead seas, in the bottom of which my encounter with the Martians had taken place. So he arrives on Mars at the bottom of a dead sea, which is actually quite good. So maybe at this point, Edgar Rice Burroughs had picked up a scientific journal or two and go, oh, yeah, the seas that have evaporated. He arrives at their city, having kind of come up from the sea into the mountains that surround the sea. Then he talks a little bit about the different, the women in the camp and the children, and there aren't any old people. And then again here, possibly magnified for effect, is that there's no signs of extreme age, nor is there any appreciable difference in their appearance from the age of maturity, which is about 40. Okay, so they mature at the age of 40, until at the age of 1,000 years. They go voluntarily upon their last strange pilgrimage down the river Is, which leads no living Martian knows whether from whom bosom no Martian has ever returned. Okay, so if they get to 1,000 years old, they take a voluntary kind of trip down to the river, and they never come back. But only about one Martian in 1,000 dies of sickness and disease, and possibly about 20 take the voluntary pilgrimage. The other 979 die violent deaths in duels, in hunting, in aviation, and in war. But by far the greatest death comes during the age of childhood, when vast numbers of little Martians fall victims to the great white apes of Mars. So that's another creature that's upon the surface of the Mars. The average life expectancy is about 300 years. So they do all right, to be honest, apart from all the violent death. And they seem to be pretty warlike. So no female or male Martian is ever voluntarily without a weapon of destruction of some kind, right? Okay, there we go. So Augly Sean has basically done some things. Okay, 550 yards, maximum firing range, 3,000 yards. Right, okay, well that's pretty good. But still, I mean, 3,000 yards is what? About 2 miles? And 3, yeah, as well, yeah. I mean, is it Martian years? Because those are twice as long as Earth years, right? Anyway, so there's quite a lot of what is quite good here. There's quite a lot of nice detail. Okay, so leather trappings, scarlet stones, brilliant silk, all sorts of stuff going on. And we're eventually introduced to a key character in these green men Martians, which is Tars Tarkas, who's sort of the vice chieftain of the community. Okay, so he's important. You have to bear in mind who Tars Tarkas is. I replied in our good old English tongue, huzzah. Basically, he discovers that the Martians don't really have much of a sense of humour. Okay, this is written quite well, actually. The ideas of humour among the green men of Mars are widely at variance with our conceptions of incidents to merriment. The deaf agonies of a fellow being are, to these strange creatures, provocative of the wildest hilarity, whilst their chief form of commonest amusement is to inflict death on their prisoners of war in various ingenious and horrible ways. So they're a bundle of laughs, the green men of Mars. So it kind of... It kind of thinking, this doesn't sound good. Anyway, so it looks like it's all going to go rather badly for John Carter until basically he gets jerked to his feet by a towering fellow and slaps him down upon his feet. And basically, John Carter at this point has basically decided he's had enough, and he punches this Martian. I swung my fist squarely to his jaw and he went down like a felled ox. He just smacks him one, and it turns out he's killed him because he's so superhuman strong. That's anyway. The Martians kind of ignore this, and they basically just keep telling him to sack, which turns out to be the word for jump. And they're most impressed by his jumping expertise. But they think it's funny that he's killed this other guy. Anyway, that earns him some respect amongst the Martians. The fact that he can jump about at ridiculous heights, and he's basically killed one of their compatriots. That's pretty darned amusing to the green men of Mars. So they're a bit wacky and a bit weird. And then we do get introduced to a young alien lady called Solar, who's part of Tars Tarkas' family. They don't have kind of sons and daughters in the same way that we do. They sort of adopt an egg at birth and then look after it. So Solar is related to Tars Tarkas, or in the retinue of Tars Tarkas, and she basically is a nice one, as it were. She's actually got some compassion, and she kind of ultimately teaches him their language. But he's also guarded by which is quite a cool little creature, and we'll focus on this thing. Okay, so this thing wanders in, and it's got 10 legs. Okay, 10 short legs, squatted down before the girl like an obedient puppy. The thing was about the size of a Shetland pony, with its head bore a slight resemblance to a frog, except the jaws were equipped with 3 long rows of sharp tusks. So it's like a dog frog. It's in my head with a dog frog with 10 legs. That's like, okay, so what was Edgar Rice Burrough on when he was writing this? No idea. But anyway, this thing is called Wooler. And if you want to sort of see how it's been imagined, it's actually quite good in the John Carter movie. It looks really, really silly, but it's kind of cool as well. So yeah, the movie does it in the weird way. But I mean, basically, here he just looks a dog frog pony with a smile to make a crocodile blush. Yes. So anyway, now that he's kind of on Mars and he's met the aliens, it slows down a bit. And he spends quite a lot of time talking about how the food works, how the nights are cold, how the moons come up and go around. Now, interesting enough, this bit is both got some scientific accuracy in it and some scientific inaccuracy. Both of Mars's moons are vastly nearer to her than our moon is to Earth. True. Okay, the nearer moon being but 5,000 miles distant. I'm not sure if that's the right number, but it's pretty darn close. While the further one is a bit little more than 14,000 miles away. So I think those numbers are about right. Somebody will be able to confirm. And against the nearly 250,000 miles which separate us from our moon. True. Okay. The nearer moon of Mars makes so complete revolution about the planet in a little over 1.5 hours, so that she may be seen hurtling through the sky like a huge meteor 2 or 3 times a night. That is true. So if you're on Mars, you would actually see, I think is it Phobos or Deimos? I think it's Phobos is the closer one. You would actually see it going in the opposite direction to everything else in the sky. So, the stars would move past as the planet rotates, or apparently so. Because of the planet rotation, the moon would actually be visibly moving in the sky, and you'd see it several times in the night if you're in the right place. So that's true as well. Like some huge meteor 2 or 3 times each night. So yes, 2 or 3 times each night. Not like some huge meteor though. So from the surface of Mars, Phobos is just a dot. Okay, probably a fairly bright dot, but a dot nonetheless. You certainly wouldn't reveal a laser's joy of the transit of heaven. So the idea of this massive moon going past, no. That's not what it looks like. A dot in the sky moving surprisingly quickly. Yes, you would see that. So he's kind of gone on the side of fun and games here, because the satellites throw glorious brightness on the surface. That's not the case of Martian moons. They're too small. They're basically just asteroids. The moons, Alan says, the moons do pass in front of the sun but don't create a total eclipse. They're not big enough. Okay, so they're way smaller than the sun appears in the sky on Mars, and the sun on Mars is quite a lot smaller than it appears on Earth, because Mars is so much further away. So he got a few bits right there. I'll give him a few points. But anyway, so then they've got a bit more about their technology. So they've got. Somehow they've got guns that are forged of amazing metal that can shoot 300 miles with accuracy, but they've only invented the candle to light things up. But they've also got something else, a far-reaching white light, based on some sort of oil, and that's seems to be it. So it's a weird blend of technology here. It's like, okay, we've got fire for illumination. However, we can make insanely accurate rifles. So quite how that was supposed to work. So I fear the lore of the Barsoom series isn't all that well developed. Anyway, so it turns out that this creature is the fastest thing on Mars. It's the fleetest animal on Mars, owing to its intelligence, loyalty, and ferocity. It's used in hunting, in war, and a protector of the Martian man. So this creature, with its 10 legs, is like stupidly quick. Anyway, so he tries to run away from it, but he can't get away from it. So he's kind of impressed. But then he does try to escape, and he encounters one of these white apes. So it's a great big fluffy white creature, basically, that just goes around being a monster, I think, basically. And he has a fight with it. Basically this thing attacks one of the Martian men, and he's John Carter rescues the Martian from it. Anyway, whacking his cudgel about. As a result, the Martians take a bit of a liking to him, because he's sort of rescued one of theirs. And this goes on for a while. Then he goes back to more description about how Mars works. So it takes, it's a sort of a Yeti, really. So yeah, you can spin it multiple ways. So again, lots of things about. Then suddenly, yeah. So then again, they've got chariots as well, um, and it's a weird. It's a very weird mixture. Like it's sort of like Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing. Um, um, yeah, it's like the luggage actually. It is. It's like the luggage from Discworld. Yeah, it's almost as if Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing this as a serial and go, what did I write last week? I can't remember this. Let's write something else. Let's make some stuff up. So So anyway, so they go and find out a little bit more about the children and how that works, and it turns out they're eggs, and that the parents aren't specifically looking after a specific egg. They just choose one, and they basically, if the egg isn't perfect, they destroy it. So they're pretty brutal. And then eventually we get to chapter 8, as you can see, a fair captive from the sky. Yeah, it reminded me of the Mugato from Star Trek, or maybe a Yeti or something like that. Suddenly, now this is interesting because there's still no dialogue. There's been no conversation at all, other than the word sack, I think. Suddenly, these people are basically on the ground, okay, in chariots, and then eventually they suddenly all take cover, and they see a huge craft, long, low, and grey painted, swung slowly over the crest of a nearby hill, and following it came another, and slowly another, until 20 of them, swinging low above the ground, sailed slowly and majestically towards us. So there were some flying machines in the sky, okay, carrying strange banners swung from stem to stern above the upper works, and upon the prow of which was painted some odd device that gleamed in the sunlight and showed plainly even at the distance of which we were from the vessels. There are figures on the vessels. Anyway, so basically the moment they wander into range, the green Martian people start blasting them. Instantly the scene changes as if by magic. The foremost vessel swung broadside towards them, bringing her guns into play. So these ships that are somehow floating in the air, technology has yet to be disclosed as to how that works, are basically firing guns back. So it's sort of sailing ships in the air, with sort of short range weapons of some kind. Notice the distinct lack of rays and sort of sci-fi weaponry here. I thought this was quite interesting. It's guns, basically rifles and guns and sort of powder and shot type stuff. Bring them to the opening into fire. So it's very traditional weaponry. It's not sort of space sciencey weaponry. Bring her up to position. So our own fire never diminished. Now that 25% of our shots went wild. So they're pretty accurate. Okay, with their amazing rifles. And anyway, the guys whoever it is on these ships floating in the air are getting shot to pieces. And the fire from the vessels is most ineffectual, owing, as I afterward learned, to the unexpected suddenness of the first volley, which caught the ship's crews entirely unprepared. Anyway, so some very, very low-tech weaponry being used. Wasn't H.G. Wells the first to use the idea of ray guns? So, so they were contemporaries. So it's interesting that H.G. Wells was a little bit more forward-thinking here. But War of the Worlds had been out for a while by this point, because War of the Worlds was published 12 or 13 years before this. So one would have thought Edgar Rice Burroughs would have read it, because as he had been a young man. When was War of the Worlds published? It was 1899. I don't want the War of the Worlds film. Yeah, okay, so War of the Worlds was written in 1895 and 1897, serialised in 1897, and available in hardcover from 1898. So our man would have been 23 at the point that book was published, and 37 when he wrote this, so he must have read it. So I'm surprised that there isn't something a bit more high-tech here. But anyway, maybe it's a stylistic choice. So anyway, so the most of the ships managed to escape. They basically get out of Dodge, and only one craft is left inside. And this one has received the brunt of the fire from the Green Martians, and it's obviously badly. The ship is now badly damaged. The vessel is drifting in circles, and it's no longer firing back. So anyway, so as it sort of nears the ground, the Green men go and grab it. And they capture. They basically swarm upon this beleaguered vessel, looking for signs of life. And our man notices that they do capture somebody from it, who's half their height. It takes him a while to figure out what it is. Could see that it walked upon two legs, and I assume it's some sort of strange new Martian monstrosity. Anyway. Eventually, they set fire to the ship and let it go. It doesn't explain how the ship works. Okay, so the ship is tied down because it seems to be buoyant, in some sort of strange way. Anyway, so they set it on fire, release it, and it floats back up into the air. As a massive roaring flames, but it doesn't. Whatever its motive. Floating power is whatever that aspect of the ship is, it's undamaged by the fire. It just keeps floating away into the air despite the fact it's on fire. So it's a bit of a weird ship. Don't quite know how that works. Anyway, Wooler the Hound is now thing, and we're introduced to a few other ones. Lorquest Patemel or Tolmel. Now I wonder. Reading that, I wonder if that's like a little play on Ptolemy. I don't know, maybe it is. An astronomer of law. Anyway, so there's whoever this is has been captured by the Green Men, and eventually he catches sight of the prisoner from the battlecraft. And the sight which met my eyes, dun, 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 here we go, here's the planetary romance, was of a slender girlish figure, similar in every detail the earthly women of my past life. She did not see me at first, but just as she was disappearing through the portal of the building, which was to be her prison, she turned and her eyes met mine across the Martian landscape. Her face was oval and beautiful in the extreme. Her every feature was finely chiselled and exquisite. Her eyes large and lustrous, and her head surmounted by a mass of coal black, waving hair caught loosely into a strange yet becoming coiffure. He's got quite a lot of detail for a single glance, hasn't he? Her skin was of a light reddish copper colour, against which the crimson glow of her cheeks and the ruby of her beautifully moulded lips shone with a strangely enhancing effect. One might be suspecting at this point, I wonder if this unexpected lady is the love interest of our main man. What do you think? Everyone want to place bets? So I quite this. I love this bit. For just as we neared the throng of Martians, I caught a glimpse of the prisoner and was able to write down 3 paragraphs of description after that glimpse. So it's quite funny. Now this is very looking back at this is classic damsel in distress stuff, isn't it? She's basically a scantily clad beauty, and possibly one of the first scantily clad beauties in science fiction. I don't know. She was as destitute as clothes as the Green Martians who accompanied her. Okay, so she's scantily clothed. Indeed, save for her highly wrought ornaments, she was entirely naked. So a bit racy, I think, for 1912. Nor could any apparel have enhanced the beauty of her perfect and symmetrical figure. I shall leave that to your imaginations, my fellow science fiction writers. As her gaze rested on me, her eyes opened wide in astonishment. So this is quite a long glimpse, isn't it? And she made a little sign with her free hand, a sign which I did not, of course, understand. So what was the symmetrical? Okay. Just a moment we gazed upon each other, and then the look of hope and renewed courage which had glorified her face as she discovered me faded into one of utter dejection, mingled with loathing and contempt. Oh no, he's upset her. I realised I had not answered her signal, and ignorant as I was of Martian customs, I intuitively felt she had made an appeal for succour and protection, because clearly she needs to be rescued, because she's a damsel in distress, which my unfortunate ignorance had prevented me from answering. And then she was dragged out of my sight into the depths of the deserted edifice. So, surprise, surprise, this actually is the entrance of the Princess of Mars. And we don't learn much more about the Princess of Mars for quite some time, actually. But and perhaps that's for part 2 of this stream. But it's I don't mind this sort of stuff in the story, because it kind of sort of fits, right? But it's very, very of its time, isn't it? Damsel in distress. Oh, there's a poor beautiful woman with no clothes. Clearly she needs rescuing by me, the hero. It's a bit of a trope, isn't it? So the sign was her flipping them. So of course, if this was written nowadays, the moment he rocks up with you need rescuing, then of course she would respond with, no, I don't. We're far more used to sort of strong, independent female characters now. Whereas, to be fair to this character, as we'll get introduced to her later on, she does have moments where she is independent and does things of herself, but most of the time she spends getting into scrapes and having to be rescued, which I don't think is her fault. I just think that's the way she's written. Okay. The true version of the portrayal of female characters in most graphic novels, even today. I mean, it's fair, isn't it? It's the woman always needs to be rescued, it's probably something we should leave behind, I think. But so it's probably a good point. It's probably a good point. So Mad Elk, Speedy Gay, gotta go. But man, they've had new book clubs. Well, we try to have fun. Okay, we do poke a bit of fun at these old novels, and then mod novels as well, as we go. Pulling out the plot holes and pulling out all the problems with them is what we do. So it's quite good fun. So a damsel out of distress. Yes, indeed. Just like Jessica Rabbit. I'm not beautiful. I'm just drawn this way. It was written in 1912, hardly an evolved time in regards to women's rights. No, so I mean, we are talking about an era that is now 110 years ago. So, to be fair, they actually have a female character that has got some independence. Actually, isn't bad for 1912. I don't think. Or can you sure I wish a woman would rescue me for once? Yeah. What's the male equivalent of a damsel? Still waiting for a woman to rescue me, 54 years and counting. What's the male equivalent of a damsel? Is it a squire? A doofus in distress. A male damsel is a sap. A sap in distress. A mansel. Fat old sod. Excellent. Dear. So anyway, our princess, who is revealed later on to be a lady by the name of Deja Torres, I think. Anyway, she is genuinely a princess of Mars, and we'll find out a little bit more. So again, Pulp Fiction of its time. It does raise a lot of interesting race issues as well. So I mean, you've got green men and red men. Okay, so make of that what you will. Not Deja Vu, no. Deja Torres, I think her name is. And presumably she's a lady on the front cover. She's slightly above a damsel in distress, but quite a lot of the time she spends getting rescued by John Carter. But anyway, we'll move on from that next week. Because he learns a bit about the language. Finally, we start getting some dialogue, and we find out what the heck is going on the server. We're about a third of the way through the novel at this point. And all we've been introduced to is some of the key characters, and everybody's fighting. No idea about what's going on the surface of Mars at all. Yeah, and a note actually as we close, a note on the movie. Now the movie to me was interesting because it was a mixture of sort of steampunky technology, but relatively close to the book, I felt at times. But it was it's an odd. It doesn't. I don't know if it makes a good film. I mean, the film was sort of quite entertaining, but I'm not sure it's it's the sort of novel that made sense to turn into a movie, because I don't think the book actually makes a lot of sense either. But yeah, they did stay relatively close to it. I mean, I enjoyed the film. It was a fun sort of odd sort of romp, but I didn't think it made a lot of sense. But having read the original book as well, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So it's just one of those slightly weird stories. And I understand it flopped rather hard at the cinema, but it was marketed as only John Carter. I mean, and it's not a name that jumps out as a sci-fi hero, is it? John Carter. The book's called Princess of Mars, but it needed something. It surely needed something Mars in the title. I mean, I don't know. It seems like an odd, but apparently it bombs pretty hard. But from a CGI perspective, it looks pretty good. The characters, the acting isn't too bad. It's just the story is odd. I think it's just not a story I think goes to film. It's a product of its era. It's a 1910, 1912 story, and they didn't really update the story for today. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It was odd. Flopped as badly as notoriously marketed, well produced, no story odder than the original. Yeah, it's just a really dated story. It doesn't make any sense because we all know Mars isn't like that. So it's just a story that doesn't work today. If you'd been able to make that film in 1910, I think it would have been amazing. But it doesn't make any sense to make it in 2010 or whenever it was made, because we know Mars isn't like that. And you've got this weird, primitive green men culture fighting against these aerial, high-tech red men, who are kind of like humans, really. It doesn't make any sense that the two would still exist, because the one culture is like spectacularly advanced and the other is really, really primitive. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't make any sense. In the modern critique of a film, it's just nonsense. It's a story that needs, it's a story of its time. I think for 1912, it's a good romp. It's fun. You can't take it too seriously, but it doesn't make sense with the level of knowledge of story construction and general facts that we have about things now. It just doesn't make sense. So it doesn't make a good story. It doesn't make a good film. It in the sense of having content. It's fun to watch, but it's just it's just the 1910 film. It's sort of like making the original Buck Rogers in black and white and just going, no, that'll do. Let's just turn that into colour. That'll be fine. Update the CGI for the rockets. It's all good. It's like you can't do that. It just won't translate. So yeah, and John Carter jumping about like he's Superman. He's leaping thousands of feet into the air. It's only 1/3 gravity. It's not like it's like 0.00001 gravity or whatever stupid like that. So it's odd. It's worth watching as a kind of like, what the hell were they thinking when they made this? Because it's like somebody said, it's really, really, really well produced. Okay, whoever produced it and made it and acted in it, they really cared about it. Whoever the writers were like, let's just take the original, make a few changes. There we go, job done. Paycheck. Really, really weird. So yeah, it is odd, but it's a fun romp. in the same way as the book is, but you really have to put on some rose tinted kind of stuff. Disney made it because it was public domain, and Wooler was put on CGI'd into existence. So there we go. There's the thing. Right, so next week, for those of you who haven't read The Princess of Mars, you can now start at where we are, chapter 9, and go on from there, and we'll find out more adventures of the Princess of Mars, who's only just arrived in the story 1/3 of the way through. But there we go. The page the page I have up is also heavily sexist. Well, yes, there are. Yes, so a book from 1912 is not all that surprised. Now, bank holidays, I will do my best to do a bit of streaming on the bank holidays, because I think we've got 3 bank holidays in May in the UK, which is kind of a bit excessive. We got something about the king. There's something to do with the king, you know. I think he's getting a new crown or something. Yeah, so I will be doing some streaming on the bank holidays, because otherwise we just won't have a stream for another month, which doesn't seem fair. So I'm putting you on report, okay, for doing. You've got to keep reading, and we will have a stream. Otherwise, we won't see you until after you move to Scotland. Yeah, King of the Britons, I think. Is it Arthur? No, it's Charles. Charles III. That's going to be a bit weird. So yeah, so we've got one bank holiday at the beginning of May, one bank holiday at the end of May. Why the UK crunches all its bank holidays, I have no idea. But we've got an extra one in May. So we've got 3 bank holidays in May this year. So nobody's going to get any work done at all in May, because the King's getting a new crown, or something. Not of Scotland. I think that complicated explanation, Sean. Anyway, there we go. Right. So, yeah, so the plan is I will see you next week, and I expect you to all have finished the book by then, right? Okay, good, agreed. Anyway, my friends, have yourself a fantastic week ahead. For those of you who dropped in newly to the chat, thank you very much for that. And have yourself a good week. I will see you on Thursday, where we're going to be doing some more Starship Simulator and exploring the Blue Nebula, which may have some ringed planets in. I think that should be quite good. Friday is the usual Star Citizen stuff. Saturday is continuing on with the incredibly difficult X-Wing, and onwards from there as well. So be good, look after yourselves. Lovely to see you again after a month, and apologies for the long absence. Hope we'll try not to do that again. Take it easy, my friends. Be good. See you soon. Have a fantastic week, and as always, right on. Take it easy, guys. Bye bye now.